Name's Abigail, though round these parts, folks mostly know me as Abby Lou. 78 years might sit heavy on these old shoulders, but tucked close to my heart, I carry a lifetime's worth of stories. And this one here, well, it carved itself so deep into me that even time, with all its slow, steady wearing down, never managed to smooth it away. Sometimes it feels as fresh as yesterday me, just 13, finally finding the grit to stand up to my daddy's iron will. Now listen close, honey child, before I start tugging on the threads of this memory. Let me share a truth I've come to know after 78 turns around the sun. Some memories are like the bitter tonics old Doc Miller used to mix up. They sting something fierce going down, but work their healing deep inside you. What I'm fixin' to tell you is just one of those. And if it stirs something in your heart, if it makes you think of your own daddy or the hush-hush secrets tucked away in your family, don't you lock it up tight. Let it breathe, speak it out loud. Sometimes that's the only way the healing can begin. Our story started shifting during the Founders Day Festival in Whispering Pines, a little slip of a Kentucky town tucked between soft hills and talking creeks. To us children, that day was pure magic, the sweet drift of wood smoke in the air, fiddles singing out from the old barn, cornbread so rich with butter it dripped down your fingers, and bonfires chasing gold across the darkening sky. It was the kind of day we held our breath for all year long. But that year, Daddy Clayton Harlow set his rule down like stone. Be home before the sun kisses the hills goodnight. Not a soul from this house is to be out after dark, he'd say. Not shouting, he never needed to. His voice alone, steady and worn like river rock, was enough to bend the very air around him. A voice shaped by seasons of hardship and stubborn grit. Most days, we wouldn't have dreamed of crossing him. But that day, well, something different stirred inside me. Maybe it was the wild pull of being 13. Maybe it was just the taste of freedom hanging so sweet and close I could almost lick it from the breeze. My friends begged me to stay a little longer, to watch the parade dance through town, to see the grand bonfire blaze up against the velvet sky. I caught my brother Wesley's eye, just 11 years old, and saw it there too, flickering in him like a spark. That fierce, silent wish for just a little more time under the stars. And Lord have mercy, how I wanted to say yes. Let's stay just a while longer, Father allowed us. I lied, the words tasting like vinegar on my tongue. I knew retribution would come later, but in that moment, the hunger for freedom spoke louder than my fear. When we finally trudged home, the sky had transformed into a velvet darkness punctuated by diamond stars. The full moon bathed the dirt path to our house in silver light. From a distance, I spotted my father's silhouette standing rigid at the door, straight as a fence post, arms folded across his broad chest. My heart hammered like a blacksmith working hot iron, and my legs turned to creek water beneath my skirts. "Wesley, go to your room," my father commanded without sparing my brother a glance. "Abigail, you come with me." I'll carry his expression from that night to my grave. It wasn't anger burning in those eyes, it was a disappointment so vast and deep that it cut sharper than any switch ever could. He led me silently to the tool shed, lit the hurricane lamp with steady hands, and closed the door without uttering a word. Then he took down the hickory switch hanging ominously on the wall. "Disobedience carries a price, girl," he finally spoke, his voice low and measured. "What ain't learned through kindness is learned through the switch." The punishment fell harsh and swift, as it always did when we broke his sacred rules. But this time, something inside me shifted like tectonic plates beneath the earth. I didn't cry, didn't beg forgiveness. I simply endured in silence, meeting his gaze with a newfound resolve I hadn't known lived within me. That silent defiance seemed to unsettle my father more than any tears or pleading ever could. For just a flicker of a moment, I glimpsed uncertainty in those normally unyielding eyes, but he recovered quickly, ordering me to bed without supper. The days that followed cast a strange shadow over our household. I performed my chores without complaint, scrubbing clothes against the washboard in the galvanized tub, tending the temperamental cast-iron wood stove, caring for our flock of leghorn chickens, but I moved like a phantom through our home, present in body, but my spirit withdrawn. I didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't smile, no longer sang the hymns and folk songs that once bubbled from my lips. It was as if that spirited, joyful girl had vanished into the night air, leaving only a hollow shell behind. My mother, Dorothea, bless her gentle heart, tried desperately to break through the walls I'd constructed. She came bearing childhood stories, suggesting games we used to play, promising to bake my favorite blackberry cobbler with extra sugar. But I had armored myself like a box turtle seething, with quiet rebellion inside while presenting a still, emotionless exterior as peaceful as Sunday morning silence. One evening, while helping Mother knead bread dough in the kitchen, I overheard my parents' hushed conversation drifting from their bedroom. The door stood slightly ajar, their voices carrying clear as church bells on still air. "Clayton, something's not right with the girl," my mother whispered, her voice tender with worry. "She doesn't sing anymore, doesn't smile. She's moving around like a little old woman before her time." "That's just the way of things, woman," my father responded with his customary firmness. "Adolescence does that. It'll pass like summer storms." "It's more than that, and you know it well as I do. It's been this way since that punishment after the festival. Don't you reckon you might have been too harsh with her?" "Discipline is necessary, Dottie. I'm preparing her for life beyond these walls. The world out there doesn't offer gentle corrections or second chances." "But Clayton, she's pulling away from us, from you especially. That child is slipping through our fingers like creek sand." A heavy silence followed, stretching so long I thought their conversation had ended. But then I heard my father say something that shook the very foundation of how I understood him. My father ruled with an iron hand, you know. While he set clear boundaries, his reactions could be excessive for minor transgressions: a sideways glance, a dish not scrubbed to perfection. The punishment rarely matched the offense. I swore I'd never be that man with my own children, that I'd only correct when truly necessary. His voice wavered slightly, as though he was unlocking a door long rusted shut. I was so stunned by this revelation that I nearly dropped the ceramic bowl I was drying. Mother must have sensed my eavesdropping because she appeared suddenly at the door, gently closing it with a soft click. The following week brought something even more unexpected than my father's confession. I was in the yard tending to our chickens when his shadow fell across the coop. It was unusual for him to seek me out alone since that night. Typically, he only addressed me during meals or when assigning chores. He stood awkwardly near the coop, hands thrust deep into his canvas overalls pockets, fidgeting like a spring colthus, eyes darting to the clouds, to his boots, to the scratching hens, to everything except my face. "Abby Lou," he began, the use of my nickname immediately putting me on alert. "Do you reckon I'm too hard on you children?" His question caught me so off guard that for several heartbeats, I couldn't find my voice. It was as startling as if one of the chickens had suddenly spoken human words. "You are as you believe you need to be," I answered carefully, measuring each word like precious sugar during rationing. He released a heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the Kentucky hills on its breath. "I know you can't understand why I'm so strict," he said, his voice softening around the edges. "But I want you to be strong, self-reliant. The world shows no kindness to those who can't stand on their own 2 feet, Abby Lou." I remained silent, uncertain how to respond to this unfamiliar, vulnerable version of my father. I'd never witnessed him attempting to explain himself, trying to justify actions he'd always presented as absolute law. "My father treated me similarly, but worse," he continued, his voice dropping lower. "I believed this was the only way to forge strength in youth, the only method I'd ever known." That's when something extraordinary happened. As the words left his lips, a transformation overtook his weathered face. Those eyes, always hard as river stones, welled with moisture, and before he could turn away or hide his face, a single tear tracked down his sun-leathered cheek. Then another followed, and another after that. "I don't want you to hate me," he confessed, his voice now trembling like autumn leaves in November wind. "I just want you to have a better life than the one I've lived." Witnessing my father weeping openly before Methis man I'd always perceived as unyielding as an ancient sycamore left me utterly adrift. I didn't know whether to embrace him or maintain my distance. I followed my heart's quiet command. I stepped forward and took his hand-to-hand rough as barnwood from decades of labor on our homestead, etched with life's countless scars, now trembling like a newborn fawn. Standing there before my father, watching his tears dampen the parched earth beneath our feet, words failed me completely. There was something profoundly unsettling about seeing a man who had stood rigid as a chestnut trunk his entire life suddenly bend and break this way. The world continued its normal rhythm, chickens scratching in the dirt, the sun traversing its familiar path, yet nothing felt the same anymore. "Father," I began, uncertain how to complete the thought forming in my mind. He roughly wiped his face with calloused hands, cleared his throat with deliberate force, and attempted to rebuild his composure. Men of his generation viewed emotional display as weakness, you understand. It was tantamount to the gravest sin imaginable. "There are burdens in this life that we carry right here," he said, thumping his chest with his fist, his voice regaining some of its familiar steadiness. "Carry them so long you forget what it felt like not to bear that weight." That was all he offered that day. He turned halfway and walked back toward the house, his shoulders now slightly stooped, as if our exchange had relieved him of a small portion of his invisible burden. I remained rooted in place, watching his retreating figure with a lump in my throat and countless questions swirling in my mind. Sleep evaded me that night. My father's words circled endlessly like a moth drawn to lamplight. Carry them so long that you don't even remember what it was like not to have this weight. What hidden burden crushed him so? What secrets had my father buried so deeply that even his family remained in darkness? The next day unfolded as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. My father returned to being the Clayton Harlow everyone recognized: stern countenance, sparse words, unyielding gaze. I had hoped that moment of vulnerability might transform something between us, but disappointment settled heavy on my shoulders. Yet I began noticing things that had always been present but invisible to my younger Aishao. He fell into brooding silence whenever someone mentioned his mother, how he never spoke of his own childhood, how he invented urgent tasks whenever older relatives visited, escaping to the barn or fields rather than sit and listen to stories from days long past. "Mother," I ventured one afternoon while helping her shuck corn. "What happened between father and his mother? Why are they estranged?" Mother sighed deeply, glanced over both shoulders to ensure we were truly alone. "Your grandma Edith was a complicated soul," she began in hushed tones. "After your grandpa Silas died when your father was just 12, she began raising the children with a harshness that folks didn't speak of in polite company. But that wasn't the whole of it." She paused, seeming to weigh how much truth I could bear. "Years later, when your father was a grown man working the land he'd inherited from his father, your grandmother remarried a man with darkness in his heart. One of those poor souls that white lightning transformed into something barely human. This man began selling off pieces of the family land that rightfully belonged to your father and his siblings to fund his drinking habits. Suddenly, the reason for that painful severing became crystal clear. My father, who valued honest work, integrity, and the sacred connection to land above all else, watching his own mother allow a stranger to squander the family's legacy must have been a betrayal beyond comprehension. Your father confronted his mother, begged her to send this man packing, but she chose her new husband over her children." Mother continued softly. "She spoke words to your father that no mother should ever utter to her child, and your father, proud as he's always been, swore he'd never set foot on her property again, never speak her name again, and he's kept that promise for 20 years. I couldn't fathom the depth of pain my father must have endured, betrayed so completely by the very person who should have been his fiercest defender. I began seeing everything through different eyes. All that rigid discipline, his constant warnings that the world was harsh and we needed to be tougher still, these were his misguided attempts to shield us from experiencing the wounds that had nearly broken him. And now she's ill and seeking reconciliation?" I asked, pieces falling into place. Mother nodded solemnly. "This man, your father's stepfather, died years ago, drank until his liver surrendered. Your grandmother lives alone now in a small house at the edge of town. She never remarried, and recently learned she has a heart condition beyond medical help. She sent a letter through neighbor Beatrice Fleming, asking forgiveness, saying she yearns to see her son one final time before departing this world. The letter that was what had reduced my father to tears that day by the chicken coop. After more than 20 years of silence, his mother had reached across the divide. Will father go to her? I asked, hardly daring to hope. I can't say for certain, child. Your father is a good man at heart, but stubborn as a mule with its hooves set in river mud. 20 years is a mighty long time to nurture a grudge, but equally long to gather courage enough to forgive. In the days that followed, subtle changes appeared in my father. He grew more distracted, quieter than usual if such a thing were possible. Sometimes I'd catch him staring toward town, as if mentally calculating the distance between holding firm and surrendering to forgiveness. One afternoon, returning from schoolies, because unlike many girls my age, my father insisted on education, saying knowledge was the one treasure no one could ever strip away. I discovered him in the tool shed polishing our old 1936 Chevrolet pickup truck, a vehicle reserved for only the most special occasions. "Are you heading somewhere, Father?" I inquired, attempting nonchalance. He continued buffing the hood to a shine, eyes fixed on his work. "Going into town tomorrow. Got some matters requiring attention." My heart quickened its pace. Had he finally decided to visit his mother? Could that severed bond possibly mend after decades of silence? "Might I accompany you?" The question escaped before I could consider its wisdom. Father finally raised his head, fixing me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "This ain't a pleasure excursion, girl. It's grown folks' business." "I understand," I replied, summoning every ounce of courage within me. "It's about Grandma Edith, isn't it? I know she's ailing and wishes to see you." Surprise widened his eyes, quickly narrowing to suspicion. "Who told you such things?" "Mother shared a little just that she's unwell and sent a letter." He fell silent, studying the polishing cloth in his hands as if it held profound wisdom. "Why not tell me the rest?" I ventured, taking a cautious step toward him. "We're family. Family shouldn't harbor secrets from one another." My words seemed to lance an infected wound. Father hurled the cloth to the ground, his face darkening like storm clouds gathering. Family? It was precisely my family that plunged a knife in my back. It was my own mother who chose a drunken drifter over her flesh and blood. I'd never witnessed my father so undone by emotion. This wasn't his usual controlled anger. This was ancient fury, preserved for decades, now boiling over like water forgotten on a hot stove. "She allowed that man to sell our lands. My father, your grandfather, broke his back to acquire. Lands meant to be my birthright and my brother's inheritance." He paced the small shed like a caged animal, gesturing sharply, his face flushed with raw emotion. "And now that death approaches, she wants me to come running for what purpose? To offer hollow forgiveness? To pretend all wounds are healed?" "I don't rightly know, Father," I answered softly. "Sometimes people simply need a chance to seek redemption before they cross over." His pacing halted abruptly. He regarded me as though truly seeing me for the first time in years. "When did you grow so wise, speaking of matters beyond your years?" he asked, anger giving way to bewildered admiration. I shrugged, feeling suddenly older than my 13 years. "We grow up, Father. Sometimes the soul ages faster than the body that carries it." He sank onto a nearby stool, suddenly appearing far older than his 42 years, shoulders bent beneath invisible weight. "I don't know if I possess the strength, Abby Lou. I don't know if I can face her again after everything that's passed between us." It marked the first time my father willingly admitted weakness to minnow involuntary tears like that day by the chicken coop, but a conscious confession that there existed challenges that even he, Clayton Harlow, a man respected and feared throughout the county, lacked confidence to confront. "I'll go with you," I offered without hesitation. "If you'll have me, that is. Sometimes the heaviest burdens grow lighter when shared between two backs." Father studied me for what felt like eternity, as if seeing me anew. Then, with deliberate slowness, he nodded his assent. "Very well," he finally conceded. "We'll go tomorrow, your mother, and me, as a family should." And so, on a crisp Sunday morning, we dressed in our finest clothes and set out in the old Chevrolet toward town. We were finally going to meet Grandma Editha, woman whose actions had carved such deep wounds in my father's heart, the woman who, even after countless seasons, still held power enough to reduce this pillar of strength to childlike tears. The journey to town seemed to stretch longer than ever before. Mother sat in the passenger seat, uncharacteristically silent, occasionally placing a reassuring hand on Father's forearm in wordless support. I occupied the back seat, watching familiar landscapes drift past the window, trying to imagine this grandmother I'd never known. Would she share Father's dark, penetrating eyes, his determined chin? Was her remorse genuine, or merely fear of facing eternity's judgment alone? When we arrived in town, Father navigated the cobblestone streets with deliberate slowness, as if delaying the inevitable confrontation. Finally, he brought the truck to a stop before a modest house with faded blue window frames and an unkempt garden. We remained in the vehicle for several long minutes, the silence heavy between us. "Let's be done with this," Father finally declared, pushing open the creaking door. No sense prolonging what must be faced. We emerged from the truck and crossed the neglected garden where black-eyed Susans stubbornly bloomed amid overgrown weeds. My heart thundered against my ribs. I can only imagine the tempest raging in my father's chest. His hand, always steady as bedrock, trembled visibly as he rapped upon the weathered wooden door. Moments stretched endlessly until the door swung inward. A diminutive woman stood before us, bent by the passage of year-snowy hair like spun cotton, gathered in a loose bun, face etched with deep lines like an ancient map, but her eyes mirrored my father's exactly. Dark, penetrating, seeming to peer directly into one's soul. "Clayton?" she whispered, her voice fragile yet clear, disbelief coloring every syllable. My father remained silent, staring at the woman who had given him life, then severed their bond. Neither seemed to know how to bridge the chasm 20 years had carved between them. "Is it truly you, my son?" she persisted, extending a gnarled, trembling hand toward him without quite making contact. "It's me," he finally acknowledged, his tone harsher than normal. "I received your message. I've come to see how you fare." His words emerged cold and distant, worlds away from the emotional turmoil surely raging beneath his composed exterior. My father wore his feelings like hidden treasure, buried deep where none could easily discover them. "Good heavens above," the elderly woman breathed, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "I never dared hope I'd see your face again before my time comes." She then noticed Mother and me, as if just registering our presence. "And who might these ladies be?" "My wife, Dorothea," Father replied, gesturing briefly toward Mother, "and my eldest, Abigail." "Your daughter?" Grandma Edith's eyes brightened with new interest. "My granddaughter? I have a grown granddaughter standing before me?" I nodded wordlessly, uncertain how to respond. Standing before this woman and acknowledging our connection felt surreal, having believed all my life that my paternal grandparents had long since passed. "I have 3 daughters, actually," my father added, maintaining his emotional distance. "And 2 sons, 5 children in total." The elderly woman pressed a hand to her heart, as if physically struck. 5 grandchildren I've never had the privilege to know. An uncomfortable silence descended, stretching painfully until Grandma Edith stepped back from the doorway, beckoning us inside. "Please come in. Don't remain on the threshold. The house is humble but clean." The interior was indeed modest yet meticulously maintained. We entered a small sitting room furnished with 2 aging but well-preserved sofas, a center table covered with hand-crocheted lace, and walls adorned with numerous framed photographs, many featuring my father at various ages, as a small boy, as a gangly youth, as a serious adolescent. He noticed these images too. I observed his gaze traveling across the display, lingering on one particular photograph himself as a boy of perhaps 10, seated on a wooden bench beside a tall, lean man who could only be my grandfather. "I preserved everything," Grandma Edith explained, following his line of sight. "Every photograph, every memory, even knowing you might never darken my door again." Father remained silent, though I noticed a muscle twitching along his jawline, signaling his struggle to maintain emotional control. "Might I offer some coffee?" she asked, looking hopefully toward Mother as if seeking an ally. "Just brewed fresh this morning." "We'd be much obliged, Mrs. Edith," Mother responded with characteristic kindness, ever the peacemaker in difficult situations. While the elderly woman retreated to the kitchen, leaning on a walking stick I hadn't previously noticed, Father remained standing, surveying the room as if assessing potential dangers. "Please sit, Father," I suggested quietly. "She'll return shortly." He complied almost mechanically, perching rigidly on the sofa's edge as if poised for immediate departure. Mother settled beside him while I chose a nearby armchair. Grandma Edith returned, bearing a tray laden with a coffee pot, cups, and a plate of what appeared to be homemade cookies. Her hands trembled so severely, the entire tray wobbled precariously, causing the cups to rattle against their saucers. "Allow me to help you, Mrs. Edith." Mother rose quickly, relieving her of the burdensome tray. "Thank you kindly, dear." The old woman smiled gratefully before easing herself into the armchair opposite Father. "The doctor advises against exertion. The heart's failing, you see, but so long as it continues beating, I count myself blessed." No one spoke while Mother distributed coffee cups. A heavy silence blanketed the room, almost palpable in its intensity. "Clayton," Grandma Edith finally began, emotion causing her voice to waver, "I harbor no illusions about deserving forgiveness for my actions. 20 years stretches long, and mere words cannot erase the suffering I caused. But I need you to hear need to speak aloud before departing this life that not a single day has passed in these 20 years without the bitter taste of regret." Father stared fixedly at the coffee cup, clasped tightly in his hands, as if the dark liquid contained profound mysteries. "Why did you choose him?" he asked suddenly, voice low but cutting. "Why did you choose a stranger over your own children?" The question hung suspended in the air, heavy as August humidity. Grandma Edith briefly closed her eyes, gathering inner strength. "I was lost, son. After your father's passing, I found myself adrift. 4 children depending on me, property to manage, and absolutely no knowledge of how to proceed. Your father handled everything, never thought to teach me about business affairs." She paused, sipping coffee from trembling hands. When Russell appeared offering assistance, it seemed heaven sent. He possessed charm, spoke convincingly, promised to care for me and you children. Initially, he truly helped. Only later revealing himself as a violent drunkard interested solely in our land. My father finished bitterly. "Yes," she admitted, lowering her gaze in shame. "By the time I recognized his true nature, irreparable damage was done. He'd sold more than half our property, and threatened worse. He swore if I attempted to leave, he'd dispose of what remained and possibly harm you children." This revelation visibly stunned my father. His eyes widened in disbelief. "Are you claiming you remained with him to protect us?" "I'm saying I was weak and foolish," she replied, tears flowing freely down her weathered face. "I should have fought harder, should have sought help, but shame and fear paralyzed me. When you confronted me that day, demanding I choose, I spoke terrible things, words born of fear and anger, not truth. And when you walked away, vowing never to return, something vital died within me." Silence descended once more. Father swallowed hard, knuckles whitening as he gripped his cup. Mother glanced between them, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "What of the others?" Father inquired after a lengthy pause. "My siblings?" A sad smile ghosted across the old woman's face. "Everett lives in Louisville. Married with children, sends occasional news. Jasper headed south years ago. We've lost contact entirely. And your sister Cordelia, bless her soul, passed a decade ago. Pneumonia took her quickly." Father closed his eyes tightly upon hearing of his sister's death. They must have shared a special bond, I realized. Yet another aspect of my father's life shrouded in mystery. "And your husband?" he asked, unable to acknowledge the man as his stepfather. "Russell died 12 years past," cirrhosis claimed him. She made the sign of the cross. "Lord, forgive me, but his passing brought relief. Our final years together were pure torment. Why wait until now to seek reconciliation?" Father's voice carried equal measures of accusation and pain. "Why not after his death? Why wait until your own mortality looms?" Grandma Edith bowed her head, seeming to shrink further into her chair. "Pride and shame, my son. Pure pride and overwhelming shame. And fear terror that you would reject me outright. that you would rightfully hurl back all the hatred I deserved. Only the certainty of my approaching end granted courage enough to reach across the divide. What happened next etched itself permanently in my memory. My father, this pillar of unwavering strength, slowly rose from his seat, crossed the small distance separating them, and knelt before his mother's chair. For several moments, he simply gazed at her, as if memorizing every detail of her aged face. "You were lovelier before," he said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "I remember your hair, black as a crow's wing, always plaited in a long braid. You used to sing when you thought no one was listening." Tears flowed unchecked down my grandmother's face. She extended a trembling, uncertain hand to touch my father's weathered cheek. "I deserve no forgiveness, my son. I harbor no illusions. I merely wanted to see you once more, to witness the man you've become, to know your family, to confirm that despite my grievous mistakes, you found your way forward." My father covered her fragile hand with his calloused palm in a gesture that astonished us all. "I made my share of mistakes," he admitted softly. "I carried this bitterness far too long. Far, far too long." That's when emotional walls crumbled completely. They wept openly, without reservation or shame. Decades of pain, separation, and unspoken words, finding release in an awkward yet profoundly sincere embrace. In that moment, my father transformed from the stern disciplinarian I'd always known into simply a son reuniting with his mother after a lifetime apart. Witnessing their reconciliation, something shifted within my own heart. Life teaches its most profound lessons in unexpected ways, you see. Sometimes we must observe vulnerability in others to recognize our own strength. Watching my father weep in his mother's embrace, I understood that true courage lies not in concealing emotions but in facing them honestly. If you're listening to my words now, while carrying ancient hurts or resentments that weigh heavy as millstones, know this truth. It's never too late for forgiveness, not primarily for others' benefit, but for your own liberation. Forgiveness represents a gift we offer ourselves, declaring that pain will no longer dictate our path. We remained at Grandma Edith's home throughout the day. My father and she had 20 years of stories to exchange. Mother assisted with preparing a simple lunch. I explored the modest house, discovering additional photographs and fragments of my father's history previously unknown to me. When departure time arrived, darkness had begun settling over the town. Father promised to return the following Sunday, bringing his other children to meet their grandmother. Grandma Edith wept again, thanking Providence for the opportunity to know at least part of her family before her final journey. During our homeward journey, Father drove in contemplative silence, but the quality of that silence had transformed. No longer weighted with bitterness, it felt thoughtful, almost peaceful. "Father?" I called from the back seat after we'd traveled some distance. "Are you all right?" He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, and I detected something unfamiliar in his expressiona, softness previously absent. "I am, Abby Lou," he replied, and for the first time in recent memory, I glimpsed the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I believe I'm better than I've been in many long years." Life at home began transforming after that momentous Sunday. It seemed the reunion with Grandma Edith had unlocked something long imprisoned within my father, releasing emotions so deeply rooted they'd become part of his foundation. Initially, he remained subdued, but it was a different quality of quietude. Occasionally, I'd catch him gazing into the distance with a subtle smile, as if revisiting pleasant memories long forgotten. The following Sunday, fulfilling his promise, we all journeyed to visit Grandma Edith. This time, my siblings accompanied us. Wesley and my younger sister Hazel approached the meeting with trepidation, having never heard mention of this grandmother who'd suddenly materialized in our lives, but the elderly woman won their affection immediately. She had prepared spoon bread sweetened with molasses that filled the modest house with irresistible aromas. "Heavens above!" she exclaimed upon seeing my siblings. "Such beautiful children! Wesley has your grandfather's distinctive chin, the very image. And Hazel resembles my mother, your great-grandmother, may she rest in peace." The scene unfolding before me touched something deep in my soul. Grandma Edith, despite her failing health, seemed to draw renewed vitality from her grandchildren's presence. She shared stories from my father's boyhood years, tales entirely new to me. His early stubbornness, teaching himself to swim in the mill creek, his protective nature toward younger siblings. This father of yours was quite the little mischief maker. She chuckled, eyes brightening with recollection. Once he scaled the hayloft roof to rescue a fledgling that had tumbled from its nest. Nearly frightened me to death with that stunt. Father listened to these reminiscences with mingled embarrassment and pleasure, occasionally correcting minor details or simply nodding with the faintest smile playing at his lips. "And you?" I asked, curiosity piqued. "What were you like at my age?" Grandma Edith grew contemplative, her gaze turning inward toward distant memories. "Oh, my dear granddaughter, I was a dreamer to my core. I longed to visit the capital, pursue education, perhaps become a teacher. But in those days, a respectable young woman had limited options. I married your grandfather Silas at 16. He was decent and hard-working, but traditional in his beliefs that a woman's domain remained firmly within the home, raising children." She sighed deeply, weathered hands smoothing her worn dress. "Given another chance, I would have pursued more education, learned to manage business affairs. Perhaps then, finding myself widowed, I wouldn't have fallen so easily into that man's deceptions." I glanced anxiously toward Father, concerned how he might react to references to his stepfather. Surprisingly, he merely extended his hand and gently touched his mother's arm. "What's done cannot be undone," he said, his voice gentler than I'd ever heard. "We must look forward now, not backward." During subsequent weeks, we visited Grandma Edith regularly. Sometimes Father went alone, returning late from town with lightened countenance, as if each visit removed another fragment of the burden he'd carried for decades. Other times, we accompanied him as a family, transforming her humble house into a place of warmth and family connection. During those visits, I observed my father gradually shedding layers of emotional armor, revealing glimpses of the man he might have been without decades of bitterness weighing him down. School days found me distracted by these developments. It felt as though I'd not only gained a grandmother, but recovered a missing chapter of our family history. Most importantly, I was discovering dimensions to my father I'd never imagined existed. One afternoon, returning home from lessons, I discovered Father sitting alone on the porch, gazing thoughtfully toward the distant hills. His contemplative expression had become familiar in recent weeks. "May I join you, sir?" I asked hesitantly. Despite recent changes, initiating conversation with him still required courage. "Certainly, Abby Lou," he replied, indicating the bench beside him. We sat in companionable silence, watching the sun begin its descent behind the ridge, painting the sky in brushstrokes of amber and rose. "Father," I ventured, gathering my resolve, "may I ask something personal?" "You may. Are you truly happy to have reconnected with Grandma Edith? I mean." He didn't immediately respond. I watched his chest rise and fall with a profound sigh. "Happy isn't quite the word," he finally answered. "It's far more complex. There's joy, certainly, but also sorrow for years forever lost, regret for not seeking reconciliation sooner, lingering anger over certain matters. It's a tapestry with many colors, daughter." He turned, meeting my gaze, direct a rare occurrence that emphasized the significance of his words. "But one emotion stands clearest: relief, as if I've carried a massive boulder upon my shoulders all these years and finally set down that crushing weight." In that moment, courage I scarcely recognized surged within me. "Do you regret raising us with such stringent discipline?" Father swallowed visibly, looking away toward the darkening horizon. "I regret certain aspects, yes," he admitted after careful consideration. "I was excessively harsh at times, especially with you as the eldest. I believed such strictness necessary to prepare you for life's hardships, a world I perceived filled with dangers and betrayals." He paused, choosing his next words with deliberation. "When your grandmother chose that man over her own children, something fundamental shattered within me, Abby Lou. Trust itself. If your own mother could abandon you, what might you expect from strangers?" I resolved never again to make myself vulnerable, and without realizing, I transmitted that fear to you through rigid rules and unyielding discipline. His confession astonished me. Never had my father spoken so candidly about his inner thoughts and motivations. "But you're changing," I observed cautiously. "Since reconnecting with Grandma Edith, you seem transformed." A small smile softened his features. "I'm attempting change, daughter. Old habits don't surrender easily after decades of reinforcement, but I'm genuinely trying." That night, lying awake in bed, I reflected on Father's words. I began understanding that beneath his harsh exterior dwelled a wounded man attempting to shield his children from pain he himself had endured. This didn't excuse everything, certainly, but it helped me view him through more compassionate eyes. Unfortunately, our newfound family harmony proved brief. Less than 3 months later, on a crisp December morning, word reached us that Grandma Edith had passed peacefully during the night. Her failing heart had finally surrendered. The neighbor who delivered the news offered small comfort, saying she had departed peacefully in her sleep, her expression serene. Father received the news in stoic silence. Though he shed no tears before us, profound grief shadowed his eyes, a different quality of pain than his former anger. It was the sorrow of double loss, first through 20 years of estrangement, then through death arriving so soon after reconciliation. The funeral, though simple, drew surprising attendance. Many townspeople came, demonstrating that despite past troubles, Grandma Edith had earned community respect. Father maintained a solitary vigil beside her casket throughout the service. When the first earth fell upon the coffin, a single tear tracked down his weathered face, just one, but this time he made no attempt to conceal it. Following the burial, our family gathered at Grandma Edith's now empty house. The scent of herbs she favored still lingered in the air. Upon the small table in her sitting room rested an envelope addressed to my father in her tremulous handwriting. "She must have prepared this during her final days," Mother observed softly. Father opened the envelope with reverent care, as if handling something infinitely precious. Inside lay a letter and an antique key. He read the message silently, his eyes traversing the page multiple times. Without speaking, he passed it to Mother, who read it and gazed at him with tear-filled eyes. "What message does it contain?" I inquired, curiosity overwhelming propriety. Father himself answered, "Your grandmother secretly saved some proceeds from the land sales. She concealed this money from her husband, accumulating it gradually over years. She's bequeathed everything to our family with a request for forgiveness and hope that we might reclaim at least a portion of your grandfather's legacy." The key, we later discovered, unlocked a small strongbox hidden beneath floorboards, containing her secret savings. Though not substantial wealth, it represented sufficient means for a new beginning, her final gesture of repentance and maternal love. That evening, back at our homestead, I heard footsteps on the porch well after midnight. Rising quietly, I peered through the window. Father stood alone in darkness, face lifted toward the star-filled sky, weeping without restraint, sobbing like a child, shoulders heaving with grief released from the deepest chambers of his soul. My initial impulse was to retreat unnoticed, pretending I'd witnessed nothing. That would have been my response previously, but recent weeks had changed me as well. I wrapped a woolen shawl around my shoulders and ventured silently outside. "Father?" I called softly, avoiding startling him. He turned, moonlight illuminating his tear-streaked face. He made no attempt to hide his emotional state or compose himself. He simply regarded me with raw grief openly displayed, without shame. "Come here, daughter," he beckoned, opening his arms in an unprecedented gesture. For perhaps the first time in memory, I truly embraced my father, not the perfunctory, awkward exchanges of holidays or birthdays, but a profound connection, a sharing of unspoken understanding. I felt his body trembling with suppressed sobs, and my own tears flowed freely, mingling with his. "She's gone," he murmured against my hair. "I barely reclaimed her before losing her again." "I know, Father," I replied, inadequate words my only offering. "But you found reconciliation. You had that precious gift." He nodded, tightening his embrace. "Thanks to you, daughter. Without your encouragement, pride would have prevailed. I would have forfeited this opportunity for healing." His words filled my heart with overwhelming emotion. My father, this man I'd always perceived as unyielding and invulnerable, was expressing gratitude, acknowledging my contribution to his personal journey. "I will become a different man," he promised, holding my shoulders and looking directly into my eyes. I refused to waste more precious time on pride and grievances. Life proves too brief and precious. And remarkably, he honored that promise. My father always stood by his word. This remained his consistent quality. When he committed to something, you could trust in its fulfillment. In the months following Grandma Edith's passing, we witnessed transformation none could have predicted. Changes began subtly, almost imperceptibly: a warmer greeting at breakfast, genuine interest in our daily experiences, a spontaneous smile here, words of praise there. The stern man gradually softened, like winter ground yielding to spring warmth. I particularly recall one afternoon when Wesley bounded home from school, excited about achieving high marks on a mathematics examination. Previously, Father would have merely nodded acknowledgement, perhaps commenting, "That's merely your responsibility." Instead, he looked up from his newspaper, smiled genuinely, and said, "Well done, son. I'm truly proud of you. Let's celebrate Sunday. Perhaps we could fish at the Mill Creek, just the two of us." Wesley's expression reflected pure astonishment. The boy stood speechless, merely nodding while his eyes widened in disbelief. With Hazel, our youngest, Father demonstrated newfound patience. She struggled with reading, often confusing similar letters, which previously provoked his frustration. Now, each evening after supper, he sat beside her at the kitchen table, patiently guiding her through lessons, maintaining composure when she repeatedly made identical mistakes. "Everyone progresses differently," I overheard him saying one evening. "No need to rush. Persistence matters more than speed." Such gentle, understanding words had never before crossed my father's lips. It seemed as though ice, encasing his heart, had finally begun thawing, revealing the compassionate man who had always existed beneath the surface, hidden behind protective barriers. With me, approaching 16 and the eldest, the transformation manifested differently, but no less significantly. Father began treating me not merely as a dependent child, but as an individual with valid perspectives worthy of consideration. One afternoon, I entered his workshop where he repaired farming implements. I observed silently for several minutes, as I'd often done since childhood. I'd always admired his skilled hands, transforming raw materials into functional tools. "Something on your mind, Abby Lou?" he asked, noticing my thoughtful expression. "Father, I'm considering becoming a teacher," I stated directly, anticipating his traditional response that women needed minimal education, that marriage and motherhood should comprise my primary aspirations. Instead, he carefully wiped his hands on a cloth, regarded me seriously, and replied, "If that represents your ambition, we'll find means to accomplish it. You'll require additional education, possibly relocation to the city eventually. It won't prove simple or inexpensive, but if that's your calling, we'll ensure it happens." I stood momentarily speechless. This man discussing support for continued education, encouraging independent aspirations, bore little resemblance to the father I'd known throughout childhood. "Don't you consider it impractical? Wouldn't you prefer I remain nearby and marry someone local?" He shook his head, a melancholy smile playing across his features. "Child, my greatest failing has been presuming to know what's best for others, believing I could control circumstances and people around me. Life has demonstrated otherwise." He placed his weathered hand on my shoulder, a simple gesture previously unimaginable. "If teaching represents your calling, then pursue it wholeheartedly. Never allow not even your stubborn old father to convince you your dreams lack validity." That night I wept privately in my bedroom, not from sadness but profound relief and gratitude for this unexpected second chance at genuine family connection. Naturally, the transition wasn't without challenges. Deep-rooted patterns resist immediate transformation. Father still experienced moments of impatience and harshness, occasionally raising his voice, particularly when fatigued or concerned. But something crucial had changed. Following such episodes, he apologized, acknowledged his shortcomings, expressed commitment to improvement. One of the most beautiful transformations manifested in my parents' relationship. Previously, they functioned like two oxen, yoked to the same plow, working collaboratively but rarely demonstrating affection. Now, small gestures appeared. Father bringing mother wildflowers from the meadow, hands touching briefly during meals, private smiles exchanged when they believed themselves unobserved. Once, passing their bedroom late evening, I overheard mother's soft laughter, a sound so rare and precious that I paused, despite knowing better. "Clayton," she said between gentle laughs, "you're behaving like the young man who courted me all those years ago. Isn't that welcome?" Father responded, his voice lighter than I'd ever heard. "I've spent far too long acting elderly before my time, Dottie. Now I want to reclaim something of what slipped through my fingers." Life, however, balances joy with challenge. Several months after Grandma Edith's passing, severe drought descended upon our region. Crops withered, livestock grew gaunt, financial resources dwindled alarmingly. In previous years, such adversity would have transformed Father into a powder keg of tension and anger. We would have endured shouting, blame, and his frustration unleashed upon the family. This time proved remarkably different. He gathered us around the kitchen table, calmly explained our situation, and together we developed solutions. Wesley and I increased our contributions to farm labor. Hazel assumed additional household responsibilities, freeing Mother to sell baked goods and sewing services to neighbors. Father applied his carpentry skills, professionally talents always evident but rarely utilized beyond our homestead. Life comprises peaks and valleys. He observed one particularly challenging Sunday, when necessity forced us to slaughter one of Hazel's favorite chickens for our meal. But when family stands united, no valley proves too deep to traverse. During this difficult period, I fully appreciated how profoundly Father had changed. Adversity that once rendered him bitter and withdrawn now seemed to strengthen family bonds. On evenings when we conserved kerosene, gathering around the table in near darkness, he shared stories from his youth, humorous tales, adventures, and mischievous escapades I'd never imagined this serious man had experienced. One evening, listening to him recount falling from the barn loft while attempting to collect bird eggs, I contemplated life's irony. It had required witnessing my father's tears twice to truly know him, to understand that beneath his stern exterior lived a man rich with feelings, regrets, and dreams never realized. Eventually the drought relented, as all natural cycles must. Rains returned, fields revived, and with them, our optimism renewed. Father utilized portion of Grandma Edith's bequest to purchase additional livestock and superior seed varieties. Gradually, we rebuilt what harsh weather had destroyed. Observing Father with his grandchildren provided one of life's purest joys. He, who had maintained such rigid discipline with his own children, became utterly indulgent with the next generation, spinning elaborate tales, teaching fishing techniques, permitting minor mischief he would never have tolerated from us. "You're spoiling these children terribly, Father," I occasionally teased. "That's precisely a grandparent's privilege," he would respond with a conspiratorial wink. "To indulge in all the foolishness we couldn't allow ourselves as parents." Life proceeded with its natural rhythm of joys and challenges. My brother Wesley married and relocated to Louisville. Hazel remained at the homestead, caring for our aging parents. I continued teaching, now addressed respectfully as Mrs. Abigail by parents of students, many formerly my own pupils. My children flourished, developing their unique aspirations. Clayton Jr. expressed interest in medicine, Pearl spoke of pursuing law, and young Silas already declared his intention to teach, just like Mommy. Observing them, I recognized possibilities unfolding that I'd never dared imagine for myself at their age. In 1959, when I had reached 36 years of age, news arrived that would again transform our family narrative. Now, more than 40 years later at 78, every detail of that day remains crystal clear. My father, 63 years old, suffered a severe heart attack while working in his beloved orchard amid those same trees he had reclaimed, planted by his grandfather's hands. I rushed to the homestead immediately upon receiving word. Mother sat beside the bed where Father lay, pale but conscious. The doctor had completed his examination, leaving strict instructions regarding rest and medication. Father, always vigorously active, resembled a caged wild creature, restless and frustrated by confinement. Such foolishness, he grumbled upon seeing me. Everyone behaving as though I'm at death's door. It was merely a warning. I'm recovering already. But his condition was graver than he admitted. I detected unprecedented exhaustion in his eyes, a new fragility that pierced my heart. My children, accompanying me, rushed to embrace their grandfather, momentarily bringing color back to his ashen features. He hugged them tightly, kissing their foreheads, extracting promises that they would care for Grandma and their mother should Grandpa need to take a long journey. Those words chilled me profoundly. Never before had I heard Father acknowledge his own mortality, even indirectly. That night, after everyone had retired, I returned to his bedroom. He lay awake, contemplating the ceiling. Unable to sleep, Father? Rested too much today. Just reflecting now. I perched on the bedside, taking his hand between mine. It felt cooler than normal, blue veins more prominent beneath skin that seemed suddenly translucent. Reflecting on what matters? He released a sigh that seemed drawn from his very essence. On life's brevity, Abby Lou. One moment we're young, believing we possess unlimited time, strength unwavering as oak. The next moment, we're confined to sick beds, dependent on others for basic necessities. Hearing my father speak this way caused profound anguish, this man who had embodied strength and self-sufficiency throughout my life. You'll recover, Father. Simply follow medical advice, rest adequately. He offered a tired but affectionate smile. Perhaps, but I'm at peace regardless, daughter. I've lived worthily. I'm surrounded by family who loves me despite my failings. I managed to correct at least some mistakes before opportunity vanished. He squeezed my hand with surprising strength. I want you to understand something important, Abby Lou. My greatest blessing has been children who surpassed their father children, who taught lessons when I believed I was the only teacher. You, especially, you taught me life's most essential truth, that transformation remains possible at any age. Tears flowed freely down my cheeks, not tears of sadness but overwhelming love that seemed almost too expansive for my heart to contain. My father, who once struggled to express emotion, now wept openly alongside me, without shame or reservation. You know, daughter, throughout my entire life I've only wept openly before others 3 times. First was that day you discovered me on the porch after receiving Mother's letter. Second was during our reconciliation. Third is now, with you. He dried his tears with his free hand. Men don't cry me, Father repeated this throughout my childhood. Men must remain stoic. But I finally recognized his error. True strength isn't found in suppressing emotion, but in the courage to express it, to reveal vulnerability, to open one's heart to others. Promise me something, Abby Lou, he continued, his voice softening. Promise you'll teach your children, especially Clayton Jr., that tears carry no shame, that greater strength resides in a man who reveals his heart than in countless men who conceal theirs. During life's pivotal moments, when emotions surface so powerfully, we recognize what truly matters. Observing my father in that bed, witnessing wisdom mingled with love in his tear-filled eyes, I realized this story demanded sharing someday, not merely with my children, but with anyone willing to listen, because some lessons prove too significant to keep private. If you're hearing my words now, you've likely encountered someone similar, an individual who appeared impenetrable as granite, rarely displaying emotion, containing everything within. Perhaps your father, grandfather, mother, or possibly yourself. Know that it's never too late to open your heart, to reveal your authentic self. Father survived 6 additional months following our conversation, precious time, during which, despite physical limitations, he seemed more fully present than ever before. He spoke candidly about his past, shared childhood memories, counseled my children, and made plans for the homestead's future while recognizing he might not witness their fulfillment. When he finally slipped away on a quiet autumn morning, death came to him as gently as a whispered prayer. Only the evening before, he'd sat out on the porch, cradling a bowl of soup in his hands, watching the last golden light spill across the bluegrass fields. That night, he simply closed his eyes and never opened them again, a tender farewell, fitting for the man he had, at long last, become. His funeral was like nothing our little town had ever witnessed. It wasn't just family who came to see him off, but nearly everyone within a day's journey, farmhands with weathered hands, shopkeepers from the heart of Main Street, even old foes who had, in the quieter twilight of their years, found their way back to his side. They didn't come to mourn the stern, forbidding Clayton Harlow of old. They came to honor the man who had learned life's truest lesson, how to give love, and how to receive it in return. And life, steady and unyielding, moved forward as it always does. Mother stayed with us a few more blessed years before she, too, found her way home. My children grew tall and bold, chasing dreams that carried them beyond the hills of our youth. I was blessed to see the faces of my grandchildren, and even live to hold the tiny hands of great-grandchildren. I taught as long as my body would allow, right up to my 70th year, until these old bones gently insisted it was time to sit a while. Now, with 78 seasons behind me, I see it plain as sunrise. Everything shifted the day I first glimpsed my father's tears. It was then I understood those we deem strongest often bear the heaviest burdens, the quietest regrets. Behind even the sternest faces beats a heart, aching to be known, aching to love without fear. If there's one truth I could place tenderly into your keeping, it's this: it is never too late not to change, not to forgive, not to open your heart to love. My father needed more than half a century to find his way, but when he did, he didn't just heal himself, he healed us all. And you, dear soul, who have listened so kindly to this telling, what will you do with it? What heart, hardened by sorrow, might you help soften? What wound, long left unattended, might you find the courage to mend? In the end, it isn't the number of our years that matters. It's the moments we dare to love, the moments we dare to be seen. Sometimes, a single honest tear, bravely shed, can change the course of an entire lifetime.